You can stop osteoporosis. You can prevent osteoporosis, and you can even build bone mineral density, so reverse osteoporosis at any age. In fact, most of the studies, and of course have been done on mice and rats first, most of the studies on humans are done in the age category of 50 to 70-year-old postmenopausal women. Why? Because that is the age category most vulnerable to bone loss and osteoporosis and the line. So the critical thing about all of this is, while I've given the videos on what you can take, prunes for example, and the supplements, the most critical factor is getting the underlying chemistry right, because in chemistry or biochemistry, nothing works without getting the underlying factors right. That's why I've shown you, or showing you here, what I call the osteoporosis bone health acidosis citrate level. Now, you've probably heard of acidosis. I'm going to go through that briefly, and I have lots of videos explaining that in more detail. Citrate, you probably haven't, and yet it is absolutely critical. We'll come back to that. But before I go on and explain this, I want to highlight how important it is to get the whole picture. Because unfortunately, when you go to a medically trained expert, they will often give you a little bit of information, say, take this and take that. It doesn't work. It works a little bit, but don't you want to get the 5, 10, 20 times factor, which is what I'm going to show you. And we know it's not just osteoporosis, because when you've got osteoporosis, you're also at risk of poor kidney health, increased kidney stones, for example, and chronic kidney disease. Oh, fibromyalgia and energy. And you'll understand this in just a minute, how it's all linked and how understanding the basic principles can make a big difference in how to actually prevent or reverse all of these. Skin infections, urinary tract infections are all linked to osteoporosis. So if you have osteoporosis, you have a higher rate or risk of these occurring. Hypertension, stroke, even dementia. So it becomes really important to understand what happens in the bones and the fact that the bones are remodeling themselves. So the bones are constantly breaking down and built up, broken down, built up in this constant cycle. 20% of your bones or something like that are recycled every year, reused every year to construct the new bones and so on. In fact, over a period of 7 to 10 years, all of your bone in your body is actually being replaced at least once. And your vertebrae appeared, your spine appears to be the slowest one, which means this is a long-term process that I'm talking about here. And so in this bone remodeling, you've got the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I talk a lot about these. The osteoclasts actually do bone resorption. So they take the bone material off, not just calcium, but they take the bone material off and recirculate it. They decrease bone mineral density, and they are most efficient at a pH of 7. It's just getting on a little bit of acid, okay? pH 7. That's right in the middle, but you'll see in a moment what I'm talking about. The osteoblasts, on the other hand, are what put it on. I always remember it from, you'll blast the nutrients onto the bone. So the osteoblasts are about bone formation. They're taking whatever nutrients they can get and putting it on. And they increase your bone mineral density, and they are most efficient at 7.4. They're very, very inefficient, almost non-existent at a pH of 7. So what we want to do, and we'll come back to this, is get that pH 7.4 around the bone material, so it's happening, and you'll understand that as we go on here. Now, apparently what happens, or what they say happens, is as we age, this increases and this decreases. I'm not convinced it's to do with age. I think it's more convinced with what we're doing with our bodies, but we'll look into that. Now, when you get to a pH of 7.4, and the osteoblasts are working all efficiently, they also produce citrate. And citrate is critical for healthy bones. It's absolutely healthy bones. The studies actually suggest citrate, and nobody seems to have heard of that, have they? In fact, the studies on citrate go up to about 1975, and there were a large number in the mid-1970s, and then virtually none again until about 5 or 6 years ago. So now they've refound citrate, and it makes up about 1 to 5% of your bone mass. Some put it at 1 to 2%. Let's just say it's an important component of your bone. So why is it there? And 90% of the citrate in your body is in your bones. The other less than 10% or so is in your mitochondria. And their citrate is the critical part. The mitochondria manufacture it, in what's called the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, and they manufacture the citrate, and the citrate is a part of the energy cycle. So all the energy that you've got, all the energy I've got for thinking, acting, anything we do depends on citrate. It depends on citrate. And so all your mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of your cells, literally rely on it. So if all of a sudden we've got a pH of 7.4 and you're not getting the citrate produced because the osteoblasts aren't working, then we're going to feel more tired and fatigued. Our brain won't function as fast. And so hold on, is that why it's linked possibly to all these other health conditions out there? So we've got to make sure there's plenty of citrate being produced. So 90% of the bone in the mitochondria, and citrate increases bone mineral density and also has a secondary role, a really important one, of helping balance the blood pH levels to about 7.35, 7.4. So it breaks down into bicarbonate, and bicarbonate alkalizes the blood. So if you're on an acidic diet, pressuring your body, constantly eating foods and stresses which are causing acidosis, low-level chronic acidosis in your body, then the citrate is converted into bicarbonate, and the bicarbonate acts as an alkalizing agent. Now that also then leads us on to a little side here, but just to give you a hint. The citrate is also what's essential to stop kidney stones. Oh, wow, why haven't we been told this? Citrate literally stops oxalate formation. You don't get kidney stones, calcium oxalate because of the calcium or the oxalate. That's ridiculous. You've been eating oxalates all your life, or you should be, because they're in your greens and in your veggies and so on. Yeah, calcium, oh, hold on, I can't have calcium because it forms calcium oxalate stones. No, that's stupid. It's all to do with the biochemistry of it. And if we go back to the biochemistry and say, well, what if we increase the citrate? What if we balance the pH? Then all of a sudden, yep, this will be another video, don't worry. But the same process here is going to work in terms of kidney stones, which is fantastic. It's a win-win situation here. And so we've got kidney stone formation, and of course, low citrate is linked with low energy throughout the body generally, and hence why it links up with fibromyalgia and energy and just general things to be able to get on with your day. So let's understand and take a step back to do with acidosis. And acidosis is really simple. You've got a range of 14 to 0. Hydrochloric acid is extremely acid, it's 1, and your stomach acid, totally independent of all this other, is 1 though, okay? It's 1, and it needs to be. It needs to be. However, your body likes to be in this range of about 7.4, 7.35, and your bone loves 7.4. So a pH of 7.4, and automatically saying, well, 7.4, 7.5, 7.3, what every one of these little jumps is a jump of 10. So when you go from a pH of, let's say, 7 to 8, that's not 1 level, that's 10 levels. You go to 8 to 9, that's another by 10 times 10 level. So you understand that's so two things is 100 difference. So what you understand is this pH 7.4 is really critical. We've got to keep it there as long as we can. And at the top of the alkali level scale is 14, and your drain cleaners and so on are probably around about 12 or 13. But just an aside there. So we want a pH of 7.4. If it's acidosis, you decrease bone mineral density, and if it's in a state that's alkali, 7.4, we increase bone mineral density. How simple is that? But that also, remember, helps citrate, which we'll show you in a moment. So when you have a state of acidosis, you've got increased bone resorption, which means your calcium, magnesium, and all the other minerals in your bone are resorbed. They're taken out, and they're actually not put back onto your bone. They go into the blood because they're trying to help calcium and magnesium help balance the pH of your blood. So they're acting in something that you would rather they work on the bone, but if the pH of the blood changes too much, literally you will get sick and die. So it's there as a top priority, and it breaks down the alkali proteins in the bone. So it's not just the calcium and so on, and it also breaks down the citrate in the bone. So not only can't you produce citrate, but when you've got an acid level around your bone, a pH of about 7.0 or 6.9 or anything below 7.4, these things start to increase more. And citrate alkalizes because it breaks into sodium bicarbonate and also helps with our metabolism. So if we're getting a lower level of bone recycling and so on, we've got increased resorption that's being put into the blood and not put back onto the body, then we're going to lose levels of citrate too. So that leads to decreased bone formation because the osteoblasts can't work. I've already described that to you. Decreased bone mineral density and decreased citrate. As a result, it's a lose-lose situation. And what we want to do is reverse that. Now, the great thing is we can change acidosis and we can alter that state. And I've got videos on that already, and I'll show you some of the things you can do in just a few moments. But what we can do immediately is look at citrate and look at the different forms. Endogenously, which means from within the body produces itself. Estrogen helps with citrate, and the pH helps balance citrate. So we want the right pH, which we've talked about. Now you're saying estrogen, hold on, if I'm 50, peri or postmenopausal, then my estrogen levels are down. Yes. And if your estrogen levels are down, then your citrate levels are down, which is one of the factors contributing to bone mineral density. So we're going to look at ways of changing that, not necessarily the estrogen, but ways that we can change that to increase the citrate. And then you've got the exogenous ones, which means from outside the body. How can we increase citrate from outside the body? Diet and gut are two factors which you'll see in just a moment. Now, what's critical here is these work in concert. As you can already see, the acidosis level affects the citrate level affects the acidosis level, and they all affect bone health. And unfortunately, you won't find anyone to describe this, because this has taken about 10 years of background research and timing and literally reading dozens and dozens of studies to put this equation together. And yet it's so important, and we will find very soon that everyone will be saying, oh, get onto the citrate, make sure you've got the pH balance. So let's go back. So when we've got acidosis forming, your body will do anything to keep the blood at a range between 7.35 and 7.4, anything. So all of the minerals, all of the protein, all of the citrate is put into the blood to do that. As a result, you have a lower bone mineral density. So what do we do? How do we know if we've got that condition? Well, if you've got osteoporosis or any conditions leading up to that with bone loss, then you've probably got that condition. However, the simplest strategy is a test of your pH of your saliva and urine. First thing in the morning, you get some pH paper, iHerb.com or somewhere else. It's about $8 or $10 for 50 pieces of paper. Really simple, really cheap, really effective. And I cover this in my video on acidosis in more detail, so I don't want to repeat it all. But you get some pH paper, first thing in the morning, a little bit of saliva on your hand or on a spoon, you dip it in and see what pH you're at. Now, if you're at a pH below 7, then you want to build it up. If you're down to 6 or 5 and even 4, then you really need to start acting on this. The urine, the same thing. You get a little bit of pH paper, put a bit of PP on it. You like that word, PP on it, and it'll change color. And then with that change of color, you can see what pH it is. Now, early in the morning, they're probably going to be pretty well much the same level. That's what we're aiming for. And the great thing is you can do something about altering these levels if you get test results showing that you're in a low-level chronic metabolic acidosis state. So what causes low citrate? Acidosis, which I've mentioned extensively, medications, particularly diuretics and blood pressure medications, although many of them do, you'll need to look into that. Diet, particularly the Western diet, the processed foods, the high meat consumption, not just a little bit, but the high meat consumption along with the sugar and the grains. Low estrogen, which I've mentioned earlier. Infections, particularly chronic infections like urinary tract infections and extreme stress. What leads to an increase in acidosis is low citrate. Oh, hold on, look, you can see they're all linked together. That's why I've got it the acidosis, citrate, osteoporosis cycle there. Medications again, diet, very much so. Again, the Western diet, infections and extreme stress, almost identical. In fact, they probably are identical. And these lead to osteoporosis, osteopenia, increase in fracture rates, and a decrease in bone mineral density, as a summary of what I've already put up on lots of other studies and information. The great thing is the therapies that have been done in the studies are all showing positive results. And not surprisingly, it shows up if you just do one of them. So in the studies where they just do citrate therapy, they give people, rats, mice, and people, lots of human studies out there now, they give them usually potassium citrate. And they give them potassium citrate at about 4 grams per day. So the potassium citrate therapy in these studies, because it works as an alkalizing agent and it helps bring citrate homeostasis back in. Remember, citrate is critical for all of your metabolic processes in your mitochondria, the powerhouse, energy house of the cells. Citrate therapy has been shown to decrease osteoclasts, increase the osteoblasts, which put all the minerals and calcium and protein back on the bone, increase bone tissue regeneration, and all of the bone formation markers, all the biochemicals in the urine and the blood that are showing that bones are being reconstructed. And then it also shows that citrate therapy leads to a decrease in bone loss, particularly in the groups which have been most well studied, postmenopausal women and the elderly. How simple is that? Now it's showing it works. Now you get a bit of a similar picture over here, and that is bicarbonate therapy, and that bicarbonate therapy is usually sodium bicarbonate. And again, they use around about 4 grams per day, once or twice a day. And as you'll see on my video, I've got an extensive video on bicarbonate. Please watch that one. And it's called bicarbonate therapy, and there are videos on acidosis, reiterating a lot of this and expanding out the whole idea. But bicarbonate therapy with sodium bicarb, 4 grams per day, sometimes in some of the studies ×2, so twice a day, never around eating food. And you watch the other videos to understand that. You have them away from food. And then those studies show that with bicarbonate therapy, you decrease bone loss markers, increase bone mineral density, particularly in the femoral neck, lumbar spine, and in the hip. Now, there are many other studies showing many other parts of the body where in the bone structure that increase bone mineral density, and lots and lots of other benefits. So imagine what happens when you combine the citrate therapy and the bicarbonate therapy. What does citrate and bicarbonate therapy look like then? Really simple. In the citrate therapy experiments, as I've already mentioned, they use about 4 grams per day, and the most common one they use is potassium citrate. Now, always use supplements according to the guidelines, and remember, always work with your health professional, preferably someone who understands this. Unfortunately, not too many people do yet, but potassium citrate, sodium citrate, a lot less. There's also citrate in food, which I've already alluded to in many cases, and the higher sources you can add to your diet. And these include grapefruit, lemon, lime, and you can see this is in millimole, but don't worry about the measurement there. Just have a look and see that. So grapefruit 65, lemon, lime around about 48, orange 47, pineapple 42, and you go down to cranberry at around about 20. By the way, you'll probably know that cranberries are very good for urinary tract infections. One, they affect the bacteria adherence, but also they alter the pH, as I've already been showing you. So we've got the citrate therapy, what you can blend in and what you can use, and you'll see it's pretty much in a way the same as some of the alkaline food. But first of all, the bicarbonate therapy, again, around about 4 grams a day is what they used in the experimental work in the studies, or 4 grams twice a day, but never ever with food. Never ever, always away from food, because it upsets the digestion in the stomach. Now, the sodium bicarb, everybody asks me, where do you get it from? Well, check out my videos, please, on bicarbonate therapy and acidosis, and you get it from the supermarket, essentially. Yep, you get them in the supermarket. They don't have aluminium. They don't have all these additives. You can get an organic one if you like, but I just go to the supermarket. Then you get your alkaline foods. These are the ones that you want to build in. And again, fruit. Why? Because it's high in minerals, and it's also high in citrate, which I've already mentioned many times. So fruit juices get a really bad rap. Fruit juices are probably the only healthy thing most kids actually get. We're talking 100% fruit juices, even commercial ones. In some of the studies, the fruit juices commercial have outperformed the homemade ones, because the juicing machine gets a lot more out of it. So fruit juices, an absolute must for kids, and an absolute, but it's got high in sugar. Look at the science of it. Stop worrying about the component parts and look at what happens in the body. because it's got fiber, because it's got polyphenols, because it's got citrate, because it's got all these other ingredients there, minerals, it actually slows down the sugar absorption. But even in the blood, it alters the way that the sugar blood levels are affecting the cells. So there's lots of factors in there. Fruit juices are a great food. Green veggies in particular, the green part is magnesium, which is very alkalizing and great for bone health, which you'll know because you've checked out the other videos. Non-starchy veggies, by the way, starchy veggies come in neutral, so they're a good one to have. Your potatoes and parsnip and pumpkins and all those other ones, great. You don't have to get rid of them, but just don't process them too much. Almonds and almond milk, coconut oil, and mineral water. Now I've got a little asterisk here. Make sure your mineral water has a pH of 8 and it's got real minerals in it, okay? A lot of the ones called mineral water actually may not be mineral water, so look for a natural source of that. And then you've got acid foods. These are the ones you want to reduce as much as possible. And the first one is obviously meat. Now why meat? Meat's a pretty energy dense, nutrient dense food. In fact, a great nutrient energy dense food. However, the amino acids in the protein include methionine, cysteine and taurine. These amino acids, they're sulfur containing. And it's that sulfur, when they're digested, releases the sulfur in, and as a result becomes acid forming. So it becomes acid forming in the blood. Meat, lower your meat consumption. And that covers most of the meats, but particularly red meat. Sugars, grains, processed foods, these are no-brainers. All the processed snacks, sugar and sweetened beverages, milk, cheese and peanuts. They're some of the acidic forming foods. Does that mean you can't have those? No. And by the way, I've got much more information on this in the other videos. This is just a shortcut to get you started. And before you attempt to do anything, watch those videos. It's about understanding these acid foods, having some of these and having less of these, preferably none of these ones anyway, and having less of these, and looking at these that you can add in as well as the citrate and the bicarbonate therapy. This is the single best mechanism to reinitiate and really set up the stopping of osteoporosis. It's the basic chemistry of stopping it, preventing it and reversing it. However, it needs to be done this with all of the other information I presented. So double check all that information, because this isn't about one system. It's about a whole body, holographic system almost, that looks at all layers and levels of osteoporosis. Please share this information, subscribe below, share and like, so I can keep doing this and sending it out to more people.